To call the July 19th, 2022 Finance and Administrative Committee meeting of the Town of Hilton Head Island to order. Krista, have we complied with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we have.
Thank you. Would you call the roll?
Certainly, sir. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Harkins?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mr. Lennox?
Here.
All present, sir.
Thank you, Krista. Committee, we have minutes from our regular meeting of May 17th, 2022. Are there any additions or deletions?
Move adoption as written.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Thank you. Krista, do we have appearance by citizens?
Yes, sir, we do. Our one and only citizen is Mr. Hoagland, Skip Hoagland.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Skip Hoagland, Windmill Harbor, you're not in compliance with FOIA. Mr. Tom H. Lennox, as chairman of the Finance Committee, I believe you owe the public an explanation for advancing approval of hospitality tax monies to the South Island Dredging Association, CETA, a registered South Carolina nonprofit. If CETA is a legitimate nonprofit entity, why are they exempt from applying to the town for funds through the ATAX process? There was a case from the early 2000s before the United States District Court involving the Harbortown Yacht Basin Boat Slip Owners Association. Described from the filing below, it would appear these private property owners were at one time financially responsible for maintaining their own dredging. What prompted the town to suddenly start footing part of their bill? Harbortown is a member of a nonprofit organization called South Island Dredging Association, whose members own property adjacent to navigable waters on Hilton Head Island. CETA contracted with Safe Harbor to dredge certain marinas and waterways adjacent to property of its members, including Harbortown Marina, at which plaintiffs' own members own boat slips. Council was recently put on notice via email from the town consultant, Lawyer Cliff, where he relates a small minority of Sea Pines property owners have tried to pass on these dredging costs to the Sea Pines owners attached. According to this email, the public already contributes to dredging costs via a portion of Sea Pines gate fees. And this dredging project will benefit Boehner Cove Creek, a prior aborted dredging initiative from early 2022, helmed by Stu Rodman, who, as many of you know, owns a home at 27 Boehner Park and is a sitting Beaufort County councilman. Cliff closed by stating general taxpayer funds should not be allocated to projects within gated communities that benefit a small but vocal minority who knowingly purchase expensive property fronting waterways prone to blockage. According to the town emails, Josh Gruber, one of the primary drivers of this public subsidy to CETA, has Gruber been in contact with Rodman about it? We know prior emails to Rodman and Gruber communicate privately often. Finally, hasn't the town placed themselves squarely in a legal quagmire by approving public funding for private purposes that's illegal according to the Supreme Court of South Carolina? Not only is it against the law, but how many other gated communities will seek the same amount of funds, and how many nonprofits will seek to ask the town directly for funding as opposed to going through the ATAX process? Mr. Lennox, you have a habit of illegally issuing and allowing the illegal use of tax funds, and we've got many examples, including the Chamber of Commerce and other private nonprofits. I guess it's your last term for office, and it looks like you're just going to do as much as you can to keep robbing taxpayers blind. I think you really need to be removed from public service.
Krista, do we have any other citizens requesting an appearance before this committee?
No, sir, that concludes appearance by citizens.
Thank you. We have 4 items of new business. The first pertains to impact fees assessed by Beaufort County, and we are asked to take action on 2 questions. The first is, staff recommends, this committee recommends to town council that it authorize the town manager to enter into an IGA with Beaufort County for the continuation of the collection of library and transportation impact fees. And the second is that in lieu of continuing discussions with Beaufort County pertaining to the collection of parks and recreation impact fees, that this committee recommend to Town Council that it focus efforts on the transfer of certain parcels from Beaufort County to the town that would eliminate the need for an IGA with the county for the collection of parks and recreation impact fees. Mr. Gruber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Wanted to briefly touch on the subject of school impact fees, just to kind of let you know where that issue stands. It was something that Beaufort County had adopted last year in 2021. And then following its adoption, the county received a lawsuit from, I believe, at least one or more residential developers challenging portions of the action that they had taken. In response to that, the county rescinded its ordinance to put in place school impact fees. So currently, there is no request of the town to take any action, nor is there any pending action before the county with regards to school impact fees. If you have any questions on that, I'll be happy to answer it, but wanted to let you know in terms of that subject matter, it is effectively dead as far as we are concerned in terms of having to take any action. I would like to now kind of cover the remaining impact fees, and as the chairman had indicated, there are several. We have had a long-standing relationship with Beaufort County for the collection of several different impact fees. And in the memo that's included in your backup, I tried to go kind of from least complicated to most complicated. And I will do that today in terms of kind of providing a highlight of those matters. So the least complicated are the library impact fees. The town has a library, of course, on the north end of the island. It contains its own service district for impact fees, which means that the projects that they're going to do are related to that particular property. It's not going to go to do libraries north of the Broad or in other areas of the county. Based upon a requirement within the impact fee enabling legislation, the government entity that puts in place an impact fee is required to update those fees periodically to make sure that the data that they're using is accurate and that the fees that are being charged are directly related to the capital projects and the additional need for growth capacity that's being created as part of the impact fees themselves. And so the county, their impact fees have been in place for a significant period of time. And beginning in 2018, they began the process of conducting the studies that would then be the basis for revisions to the impact fee that are pending before us now. And ultimately, with regards to library impact fees, what that recommendation is that our impact fees be updated that will ultimately reduce the cost of what is being paid, and it's outlined in the memo, but essentially it's going from right now $553 per new single-family residential unit and $553 per new multifamily housing unit is being collected at the time that a development permit is issued. Under the new fee rate, there's a sliding scale that would be created based upon square footage of the residence that's being constructed. For a residence that is 1,000 square feet or less, it would be $151, all the way up to a residential unit that's 4,000 square feet or more, paying $417. Either way, it's a reduction based upon what the prior impact fees were and still would be utilized specifically for the benefit of the library on the island. In the memorandum, it's referenced that staff's recommendation to the committee and ultimately, if you agree to council, currently our intergovernmental agreement with the county says that we will collect that impact fee on the county's behalf and that we will remit that fee to them on a quarterly basis, and we essentially retain a 1% administrative fee for kind of our costs that are incurred in collecting it on their behalf. Because of the recommendations that we're ultimately going to make with regards to the transportation impact fees, we're recommending that what we do is, rather than collect those fees on behalf of the county, we would agree that we would not issue a development permit until the person who's seeking that permit would show us with proof that they have paid the fees directly to the county. So I'm going to cover that a little bit more when we get to the transportation fees, but know that that's our recommendation with regards to library fees, is to approve the updated fee schedule and to do an agreement with the county where we would agree not to issue a development permit until they've showed that those fees have been paid.
Josh, for clarity, the impact fees are paid by the developer of the particular real estate. They're not a continuing tax on the
Correct.
resident.
Yeah, typically it's on new growth. Now, if you have an existing property, particularly commercial property, and you go for something that is, say, 1,500 square feet to something that's 4,000 square feet, you may have to pay upon the difference because the larger footprint would create more demand than what was previously allocated for. But otherwise, yes, it's almost usually used on new development.
Right, thank you.
So the next impact fee is Parks and Recreation impact fees. And again, the county and the town have had somewhat of a convoluted history. We have had a long-standing agreement with the county to collect Parks and Recreation impact fees. However, the service area that's currently in place, and that would be proposed to remain in place under the county's proposal, is essentially all of the south of the Broad area. So if you take the Broad River as a geographic point, all of those areas that are south of the Broad River are within this Parks and Recreation service area. In the prior agreement that the town had with the county, there was explicit language that said the town would collect the Parks and Recreation impact fee on behalf of the county, but we would retain those funds and we would then expend those funds for the parks that are located on Hilton Head Island, the parks that are actually owned by Beaufort County. And so it's a very hybrid relationship that the county is imposing the impact fee, we're collecting it, but we're keeping it and we're expending it because a lot of the times we're the ones doing more of the capital project planning for those properties than what the county does, even though the county is the owner of the properties. So rather than look at the updated study and the figures and what would that translate to, we start from a position of the county's notified us that the language that's in our existing agreement that allows us to retain the funds that are collected here and expend them here, they don't believe that that's something that's allowed under the naming legislation. Because the service area covers the entire south of the Broad area, they believe that the funds collected, even though they come from Hilton Head Island, should be spent within the entire service area. And so we had some concerns with that, given what our prior relationship was and the fact that we believe that the funds that are collected here needed to remain here for the benefit of the parks that are on the island. So because of those concerns, what we have been discussing, and there's a pending agenda item before Councilman Harkin's Community Services and Public Safety Committee for Monday the 25th, so a week from today, where we would discuss a potential land swap with the county. There's a couple of parcels that are owned by the town that we would look at transferring to the county, and in return, there's a couple of parcels that are owned by the county that would be transferred to the town. Specifically, some of the Parks and Recreation properties that are still in the county's name. The thought is, if we focus our time and efforts on accomplishing that land swap, and we are ultimately successful in obtaining title to all of the Parks and Recreation parcels that are on the island, the town has the lawful authority to do its own impact fee. And we can use the information from the Tischler-Bice study as the basis for that, but we can essentially achieve the same result, which is, if we wanted to, we could collect an impact fee from development occurring here on the island and use it for the exclusive benefit of the parks that are located on the island. And so the recommendation that's before you in the staff memo is to do just that. Pursue the land swap with the county, where we would receive title to those parcels. And after we've received title to the parcels, we can have a discussion about whether the town would want to consider imposing its own Parks and Recreation impact fee.
And no county fee.
And no county fee, no. The last fee is the transportation impact fee. That is one of the more
Quick question on
costly.
parks. Can we ask that before he moves on to transportation? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Absolutely, please.
Yeah. So you're saying all parks, correct, Josh? So if there's joint ownership between us and the county, that would fall within that list?
Yep, so
also?
right now, our goal would be to eliminate any kind of joint ownership for recreational properties. We would obtain sole ownership as the town, and that way, if we put in place an impact fee, we could expend those funds just on our properties.
Okay. And the interpretation of the legislation that the county is saying is not anymore, do we have the same interpretation from our?
We've looked at it, I know the town attorney's here and would like to speak on that if he desires, but our thought was, rather than challenging them on their interpretation, if this was successful, then we would accomplish the same objective without necessarily having to have that fight over whether or not their interpretation is or is not correct.
Fair enough.
Okay.
So was the status of the current impact fees without any changes being made here today and with the current ownership? We're just kind of in a limbo of where we are now,
So,
pending
yeah.
approval of the transfer, which
It's a great
we assume
question.
has a good chance of passage.
Yep. So we've had impact fees in place for a substantial, at least since the late 90s. We've had impact fees in place. But because the timing has gotten so stale, the county has basically said, we're either going to update these fees with new information, or we're going to rescind these fees and we're not going to collect them. But that, I would say they would probably not continue with the status quo of the current fees. They're going to do one or the other. And that's where they've asked us, they've prepared a recommendation, they've prepared a report. If we would want to agree to it, we can, to go along with the updated information. But again, because of the concerns about collecting the fees from development on the island and spending those fees for improvements off the island, we're not recommending that path at this time.
I think it'd be great if we could get all of the parks that are on the island to be owned by the island so that we can maintain them to our standards.
Absolutely. And obviously, these issues are not mutually exclusive of each other. If we go down that path and we're successful, great, that solves this issue. If we go down that path and we're not successful, we can always come back to this.
Sure.
And the fact that they're happening fairly contemporaneously with each other means there shouldn't be any issues with that.
So it's said another way, if the county proceeded the way they've shared, then we have the potential of a dilution of revenue.
That's our concern, yes. And you know, their argument, and this does, I think, resonate more with the transportation impact fees than it does in Parks and Rec and Recreation. Their point is the residents of Hilton Head Island have the use and enjoyment of recreational facilities that are off the island. And our counter to that was, yes, while they may have that use, they don't make a lot of use of those facilities. We typically have here what meets their needs, and so that's why we want to focus on keeping those funding here for those properties, because the recreational properties that are in Bluffton and in the unincorporated portions of the county, we don't believe are heavily utilized by Hilton Head residents.
Thank you.
All right. In terms of transportation impact fees, again, we've had a long-standing intergovernmental agreement with Beaufort County to collect transportation impact fees, and those fees have been historically spent on infrastructure projects that are located both on the island and off the island. And part of the justification with that is, while we don't necessarily use the recreational amenities, it's hard to argue that Hilton Head Island residents don't use the roadways that are located off the island, because essentially you have to use those to be able to get here. And so that's part of where our relationship exists now, is that those fees are collected both on the island and off the island, and then as infrastructure projects come up within the entire south of the Broad area, those fees are used to help pay for those projects. And again, what's driving this is the need to update those fees. Part of our concern when we looked at updating those fees is a couple of difficult decisions. One, if you take all of the CIP projects that are identified in our plans, if you take all of the CIP projects that are identified in the town of Bluffton's plans, if you take all of the CIP projects that are identified in the county's plans, and if you take all of the CIP projects that are identified in Hardeeville's plans, because again, they are in the south of the broad service area, that number grows to be a very significant number. And so when you look at then apportioning that on a per new residential or multifamily unit basis, that number becomes fairly significant. So one, we had a concern with that just because in the aggregate, it would be difficult, I think, to justify that large of an increase in the impact fees. But the alternative is then you have to rank and prioritize which projects will go into that list and which projects won't go into that list. And obviously that can be a very complicated process. So knowing where we're at with this, knowing the county's desire to update the impact fees, but to do so in a timely manner, we came up with a suggestion of, rather than agreeing to the impact fees that the county has proposed, what we would do is agree that we will not issue a development permit unless the county's impact fees have been paid. And again, those service areas cover both on the island and off the island. And so in the voluminous amount of materials that were in your backup today, there was a spreadsheet that listed what those projects were. And you can see that it's a fairly healthy balance in many different areas. So where that would leave us is basically agreeing that we will say, you, Mr. Developer, you need to go pay the county the impact fees that they've adopted. And once you've shown us that receipt, we will then issue a development permit, but we would not be an actual part of the impact fee process itself, as we would not sign into an IGA for that purpose. And I can tell you that the town of Bluffton appears to be going in that same direction as well, and they've already introduced this and kind of had an initial round of discussions about implementing this particular solution. And again, I go back to the first impact fees. Because we're recommending this for transportation impact fees, it didn't make sense to us that we would tell somebody, you need to go to the county to pay the transportation impact fees, but you still need to come to us to pay the library fees and potentially a parks and recreation fee. So why don't we just have you go to one place and pay the library fees and the transportation fees? So that is why you have the recommendation that is before you today.
Question, Tom.
Happy to answer any questions.
So administratively, it's a lot cleaner.
It is.
The one concern I have is, has this concept been vetted with the county, and do they indicate that they will go along with it?
Yes, this has been discussed directly with representatives, both staff and policymakers with the county. We held joint meetings with Mr. Greenway and Mr. Passament. They are supportive of that. Ultimately, their concern is the realm of impact fees appears to be ripe for litigation at this time. There's some folks within this state that are kind of turning that into a cottage industry, going around to different counties and filing class action lawsuits because of concerns about these issues. And so for the county's purposes, they either want to update the study, which they've been working on again since they commissioned it in 2018, and they've had the data since 2019. They either want to adopt it and move on with it, or they want to rescind it and go ahead and walk away from it.
That's good. My second concern is the nuts and bolts of proving that the fee has been paid to the county. What would be acceptable?
So we would work with the county directly on them. Either it's a receipt in a certain format produced by the county, or better yet, what we've actually talked with them about is if they can create a portal where somebody can go online and pay rather than having to go into a physical building to get a receipt, that we could then receive some kind of confirmation directly from the county system that such and such permit was paid. And that way, we're not having to rely upon the applicant. We're getting something directly from the county that confirms this is what was paid.
That's more of an administrative matter for staff to handle, but
Correct.
we do need to have some clear method of confirming that those fees have been paid.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
First, I second what Councilman Stanford is saying as far as the process is concerned. We continue to get better in our being open for business and being very expedient in our business. And with the need for some redevelopment to happen on Hilton Head, just don't want the reputation to be that it's a pain to pay some fees and move forward with the project. So that's definitely very important. As far as I guess the study that is before the county at the moment and future studies, if you can help me with that a little bit, Josh. Did we have any influence on the ordering of the first study and the prices that came out of it?
I don't believe we did have any involvement the first time around. I believe it was exclusively with the county because what they were updating were the county's impact fees. The town does have its own, we have a transportation impact fee. And so when it gets to the point that we'll need to update that, we will be responsible for it. But I don't believe we had any involvement. But the calculations that were performed, they are somewhat controlled by statute because the elements within there have to be looked at in terms of growth capacity, anticipated infrastructure needs, your CIP projects, and then impacts to affordable housing. So all of those things are requirements within the enabling legislation that then have to translate into your study document.
Okay, all right. And as far as the next time that there'll be a study done, is that by statute or is that just depending upon the county's desire?
It is by statute.
Okay.
And that's where the county is significantly beyond what the statute requires, which is, again, driving the concern that we act expeditiously.
Okay, and when will they have to do it again?
I want to say it's every 7 years, and I can get confirmation for that from the statute, but I believe it's every 7 years it has to be updated.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Bill?
No. Excuse me, the presentation on the three impact fees make a lot of sense to me. I think it's getting streamlined, and I'm supportive.
Josh, the current impact fee collection at the county level, I assume those funds are pooled and then allocated given the CIPs of the areas?
Correct, especially the transportation impact fees. Those are collected by us, remitted to the county on a quarterly basis, and then they're pooled for the entire south of the Broad service area. And then they're tracked within the county's financial documents by those separate service areas. The library impact fee, because Hilton Head is its own service area, it is segregated to just that particular location. And again, the parks and recreation fees, we're currently retaining and then expending on those properties.
Okay.
So yes and no.
And as it pertains to the second question of transfer of title of the Beaufort County owned parks, those fees would be retained by the town?
Yes. Ultimately, after the transfer is done, any fees that we have would remain with us, and we would basically finalize expending those on those properties. The collection of new fees then would be for a question for council about, do we want to use that as a potential funding source for parks? But we would put that in place via our own ordinance rather than using the county ordinance and an intergovernmental agreement.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move toward action on the two questions via motion, and once we have a motion in place, I'll take comment from the public. First question is that we recommend to town council that it authorize the town manager to enter into an IGA with Beaufort County for the continued collection of library and transportation impact fees.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion or comments from the public? If there are none, Krista, would you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes.
Mr. Stanford?
For the motion?
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Motion carries, sir.
Thank you. The second question is that in lieu of continuing discussions with the county pertaining to the collection of parks and recreation impact fees, This committee recommends to Town Council that it focus its efforts on the transfer of certain parcels from Beaufort County to the town of Hilton Head Island.
Move to support.
Second?
Any public comment? If there are none, Krista, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes.
Mr. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Motion carries, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Need we discuss anything further on Beaufort County impact fees?
No, sir.
Next item under new business is the consideration of a resolution approving the 5-year consolidated substantial amendment as required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, more commonly referred to as HUD, for participation in the Community Development Block Grant Entitlement Program. Marcy, this is your domain.
Yes, thank you. For the record, my name is Marcy Benson, Senior Grants Administrator for the town. And before you today is a staff recommendation for the committee to forward a recommendation to Town Council for approval by resolution of a substantial amendment to the town's 2020 through 2024 5-year consolidated plan. In 2020, HUD accepted the town's 5-year consolidated plan, which included the 2020 CDBG funds and the first and third rounds of CDBG COVID funds, also referred to as CDBG CV funds. Little tongue twister there. On May 13th this year, HUD issued a notification of a reallocation to the town of CDBG CV funds in the amount of approximately $102,000. These funds became available when other CDBG grantees did not apply for or declined their awards. The reallocated funds were made available to grantees who demonstrated the capacity to quickly expend the CDBG CV funds, and grantees eligible for the reallocated funds were limited to those that expended 99% or more of their CDBG CV funds by January 4th of this year. So in order to accept this reallocation, HUD requires that the 5-year consolidated plan be amended to include this new amount of funding. As of the end of June this year, the Community Foundation of the Low Country has distributed approximately $730,000 of the 2020 CDBG funds to 16 public service organizations. And in accordance with the CDBG Administrative Services spending limits, there was approximately $38,000 of the 2020 CDBG and CDBG CV funds that were distributed for administrative services. The Community Foundation of the Low Country has acknowledged that 2% of the reallocation amount, or approximately $2,000, is sufficient to carry out the administrative services for the reallocated CDBG funds. And the town's citizen participation plan guides the development of or changes to the consolidated 5-year plan, and it defines a substantial amendment as when activities are added, deleted, or substantially changed in terms of purpose, scope, location, or beneficiaries. Therefore, this substantial amendment, which proposes approximately $102,000 in CDBG COVID funding to address prevention, preparation, and recovery efforts related to COVID-19, does make this a substantial amendment. The draft of the 5-year plan substantial amendment was released to the public on June 30th. There was also a public meeting held that day. There were no public comments received. There is a summary reflecting these results, and that's included in the amended plan. And upon submission of the amended plan. HUD will review it, and if satisfactory, an acceptance notice will be issued, and a revised grant agreement will also be issued for signatures between the town and HUD. So I'm happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Marcy. Committee, what are your questions and comments?
I'm happy to receive another $102,000 for this beneficial program, and I appreciate your succinct presentation. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. Marcy, thank you again for all your hard work. There's always a lot of material and detail to what you present. Thank you for being able to pull it together very concisely for us. As I was reviewing this and noticing that we're receiving more funds because ultimately others either didn't qualify or didn't ask, right? And I know that we've been keenly focused on CDBG as a funding source, and we're able to get these funds because of our census tracts, right? So I'm just curious, not that it's germane to our action today, but in the future, if you could, to this committee, provide us maybe with some other grants that may be out there that would serve the purpose of enhancing these areas, okay? I had the pleasure of dialing into a Environmental Protection Agency roundtable, I think it was a couple weeks ago. But there was a lot of talk from institutions and agencies about monies that are out there that could flow into communities. So I think that we can, do a little bit more than scratching the surface on this and see if there's some other opportunity for us. So if you could kind of give us a list of what's out there, what we have not been able to tap into, and maybe there's some opportunity for us to make some moves at the policy level in order to get you to the point where you could tap in. I think that's nice for us. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. Support the direction.
Thank you. Great.
Marcy, would you make a comment on the relationship that the town has established with the Community Foundation of the Low Country as it pertains to grant applications and grant awards?
Sure. Back in 2020, the town started a collaboration with the Community Foundation of the Low Country specifically for the CDBG COVID funds. And over the course of the last few years, I've worked hand in hand with their staff. Their staff and committee handle the vetting of the applications that come in, but they are based on the requirements that HUD has set forth for us as far as income limits and that type of information. And then based on that relationship, when the town received its ARPA funds, we've set up a similar program to benefit low to moderate income residents with ARPA funds. So they're very similar projects, but the pots of money are coming from different sources. The CDBG funds are a little bit more particular because I have very, very specific reporting requirements to HUD, where the ARPA funds, although we have reporting requirements, that goes to the U.S. Department of Treasury. So I work pretty regularly with the staff at the Community Foundation.
And are you satisfied to date?
Very much. We have a very good relationship, yes.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Marcia, you need this committee to move on a resolution approving this 5-year consolidated plan.
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve the resolution and forward it to town council?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments from the public? If there are none, Krista, please call the roll.
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes.
Mr. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Motion carries, sir.
Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you.
John Troyer, welcome back.
It's
Looks
good
like
to be
you
back,
lost some
Mr.
weight.
Chair. It's good to be among the living.
Yeah, your report is on the 11-month, May 30th, end of the town financial statements.
Yes, it is. Okay.
For those of you in attendance, we have been having John report to this committee on a monthly basis since COVID really hit. And the purpose of this report is to establish any trends, both favorable and unfavorable, as early as we can, and make recommendations to react appropriately, and also to identify any variances that are significant, both favorable and unfavorable.
Yes, sir. And I would add also, I serve on the committee with the Community Foundation to evaluate grant applications, and we are scheduled for the next set of grant applications are open now. And so if any agencies are interested in applying for those, the applications are available, and we will evaluate starting on August 11th. So that next set will be, we're just happy as can be with that process. Okay, 11 months in. Okay, again, town council, to previous action to build reserve, diversify revenue streams, invest in the island. All of these things continue to benefit the town and continue to help the town have resilience when, whether it's a storm or whether it's COVID, to thrive in the midst of difficult circumstances. And so May preliminary results, as the chairman said, this is 11 months in, 11 out of 12, and so we are getting close to the end. May, you can see these are general fund revenues. May is not a big collection month, but we did have a higher collection in May of 2022 than the last 3 years. And for the year to date, we are 9 of 11 months greater than last year. So we're happy to report that. Our revenue strength continues. Again, we're continuing to exceed the last 3 years. This is year-to-date revenues. And so year-to-date collections, 11 months in, we've collected 41 million. Our budget is 44. And so we're well on track to meet and exceed the budget for 2022. June is a big collection month. And so the way that we record revenues, it's got to be due for June 30th, and so it's got to be officially owed at June 30th. It's got to be measurable, and it's got to be available. And available, we measure that through, do we receive that by July 31st? And so everything through July 31st that relates to June 30, we will continue to post. So we've got another 11 days or 12 days to go that we will continue to post June activity. But June, you can see, is a big month. It's a quarterly reporting month for a number of different revenues, and so June is always a significant month for collections. Property taxes, we're already there, and so we don't have a lot to go in June, and we don't need it. And so we can say that we've collected what we anticipated and counted on for 2022 on property taxes. We're at 16.1 million for general fund. We'll collect a little bit more here in June, and so that's coming up, but we're almost fully collected, and again, we've exceeded the last 3 years comfortably. Look at our revenues, 11 months in, and so some of the seasonal variation is out. Our TIF continues to work well at 8% up. Local aid tax continues very strong at 35% up. State aid tax, very strong, 35% up. Real estate transfer fee last year, 2021, was a record year, and so we're only 1.5% behind a record year, and so we are very pleased with that. H tax at 30% up, beach preservation fee 35% up. Electric franchise fee, we've had some communications with our friends at Palmetto Electric, and there's a seasonal aspect of it, there's a weather aspect of it, and so we're just a little bit behind, but that happens, and they expected that, and our numbers did not surprise them at all. Road usage fee, we paused on our collections, and so this stopped earlier in the year. Stormwater, we're almost fully collected, and it's very, very stable, and so our stormwater numbers are what we would expect. And property taxes we talked about, business licenses. June is still a big month for business licenses, and so we can say we're 29% up this year, but June will be significant, and so it'll be interesting to see how those final numbers come in. Emergency management, our ambulance fees, 8.7% up, and so that's a measure of activity at the same rates. And so our permits are down, but last year was a really, really good year, and so if we're off just a little bit, that's not too much of a disappointment.
John, raise that mic up a little bit.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Can we interrupt you, John, as you're going through the slides, or you want to wait till the end for questions?
No, let's interrupt me, please.
Okay, thank you. So a couple notes on the business license. That we were showing that, there we go, almost a 30% increase there. Would you say that that's because of the change in the legislation as to why we are seeing that increase, or is that related to the increase of revenue by the businesses?
It's primarily the increase of the businesses, revenue of the businesses. I've got another slide later on that will show a little bit more information. One of the things that we're still looking at is how much of that is a timing aspect, and so businesses have a choice. Do they want to pay monthly or do they want to pay quarterly? And so, and it doesn't have to be consistent from year to year. And so I think we'll have a more full picture once we get the July revenues in, but I have a little bit more information later.
Okay. And hopefully we'll cover this later, but I want to get it off my head before I forget it. The option to pay monthly or quarterly, is that provided to a brand new business that is asked to estimate their revenue ahead of time?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right, thank you.
And John, since we just came out of a discussion about county impact fees, the last line is permit revenue, and we've seen a consistent decrease, I think, in the number of permits that have been issued. So we're becoming a less significant player in the world of county impact fees.
Yes, and so that's, I think would be a good discussion for another day to talk about the permits that we keep, because we do have separate funds for those, and just kind of go through the activity that's related to those permits, and then the Beaufort County, we collect on their behalf and remit to them. That's a different thing. So I think, yes, that, like to Mr. Harkin's point, this is streamlining. Mm-hmm.
On the road usage fee, I recall the reasons that we suspended it, but it looks like the legislature has gone full circle and possibly opened that up. It probably is a question for legal advice to come forward to us, but I think we ought to look at the effects of the new legislation that came down at the end of the session on the road usage fee. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I'm just posing the question.
Yes, thank you. I think that's most certainly worth a look.
In terms of the permit fees too, if we could encourage more repurposing, more renovation, that could help a lot with permit fees.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, comparisons are more meaningful. This compares May through full fiscal year of 2021, and so we're 77 million collected compared to last year's 86 million, so 89%. And so all of these are very favorable, and we'll see even a couple of them are already over 100%, and so we're looking for a strong June as well. Last month, and just it shows that May was a little bit, was not a high collection month traditionally, and so we went from 85% collected to 89.8 in the month of May. And so we're making progress. June is a better month. 90% collected. We're feeling good. We won't stop at last year's 86 million. And so our expectations, we'll see what the numbers are next month. We'll be able to report back. Real estate transfer fee, you can see through the 11 months that we have a very consistent message, is that we're substantially more than 2020, but not quite as high as 2021 collections, and that's been a consistent message throughout the year. And so we can see our 2021 is the highest, and we are slightly behind this year in the 2022 numbers, and it'll be interesting to see what the changes in interest rates due to the future of these transactions, how much of an impact that will have on real estate transactions. And so it's coming up. Also, and this is similar to other revenues, is June is a very important month. And so we've got 11 months in. You can look at last year's collections in June was the best of all of 2021, and so we'll see how our numbers compare. We'll have it soon. Business licenses, a little bit of this. We've got local business license, then we have some state-collected MASC business license revenue, and we also have a little bit of transportation revenue. I think we should just talk about the first two, and I think this speaks a little bit to Alex's question. How much of this is related to our changes in the model ordinance versus how much of this is due to changes in activity. And I think because the local business is up 30% and the state business is up 25%, I think you're seeing that difference is probably more in tune with how much the model ordinance added to the change in activity. And so we'll have a little bit more of this dynamic, a more complete picture with the June numbers, but I think you'll see, I think those numbers will be an indicator of how much of that change in the ordinance came back into our revenues. I hope that's helpful. Business licenses, again, this slide just shows that there's another 3.7 million collected in June of last year, and so June is a very important collection month, and so we can look year-to-date through May, but we need June to get the full picture.
John, when does the change in short-term rental business license take effect, requiring a single property owner to pay a business license fee?
Oh, it's January 1st, and so it was January 1st, 2022. So we started this calendar year with that change.
So that's baked into these numbers as well?
Yes. Yes.
Did you explain to us why the state MASC fees are down 59%?
This is just, the first column is year-to-date, so it's 11 months, and the second column is all 12 months of last year. And so what this shows for the state is that there's large collections in June. And so what I'm just trying to show in this slide is that June is really important, and we need June to get a full picture. And so it's less than a full year's collection because there was only 11 months, and June isn't a large collection month.
So what we're saying is that businesses wait until June to pay their business license tax.
Right. Yes, for the local, and yes, the state waits until June, and then we get some collections in July that relate to June, and so all of that happens, and those dynamics happen, which we need all of these collections to come in so that we can give you a better or more complete picture.
John, just to help me with my memory here, I know when we were discussing the adoption of the license fees aligning, there were some stipulations around windfalls. Would it be any penalties if we are over a certain percentage?
No. What the rate study was based on the previous years, and so we had a neutral stance with the change in the business license categories, the different categories that the businesses reported to, and with the model ordinance, it changed a number of different categories of businesses reported to, and those rates were slightly different in the different categories. And so our study, and we went by the instruction from MASC. We did the study based on the most recent full fiscal year, and we made it come out even. And so that was all.
Okay. So we don't have to reevaluate if we are, I mean, after June is done, we'll have a better picture, not a totally clear picture, because we still have some overlap between the two when the ordinance was adopted. I guess where I'm going is, are we free and clear of having to go back and reevaluate our rates?
We are.
Okay.
There's nothing to prevent us from doing that, but we don't have to. Expenditures, spending by month, you can look, our May numbers are slightly less than what our average was for the year. And so we can look at that as a favorable May expenditure, but you can also see June, we have, we change, most of our reporting is on a cash basis through May, but at June, we convert to an accrual basis, and so we're a much more traditional accounting presentation with June, and that shows that it shows up as higher expenses in June. And so we true up everything and we book everything. And so what we've asked our departments to do is turn in all their bills by the end of July so that we can get those posted, and we'll have our June numbers here coming up soon into August. And so June is traditionally there's more expenditures that fall into the June bucket. Year to date, we're a little bit more, 2.6% than last year. We're pretty consistent. We're consistent with our budget. We're at 82.5% of our budget. And so we're on track, but we're also, I think you'll see in the next slide, okay, maybe not. 2.6 more than last year. We've got a little different mix of where people are, a little different mix of where some expenses are, but overall a 2.6% increase in prior year to date. This is more, I wanted to talk a little bit. We are 82% spent, 82.5% spent through the end of May, and last year we were 80.8% spent through the end of May. And I said a couple of things that drive that is that, one, our budgets are a little bit tighter, and so we're showing a little bit higher percentage. And also we are very purposeful. A year ago, we were holding back a little bit just because of a nervousness for the COVID, and this year we have been more make sure that we go and do what's been anticipated in the budget. And so what that will mean is that we'll have a higher utilization of our budget when all is reported. Temporary use of the reserves, we're looking good. If you just look at that bottom line, $4.6 million to the good year-to-date through May, compared to $1.7 million year-to-date May 2021, and so that's good, but it's preliminary, and so because June is so important that we don't want to hang our hat too much on this, but we can say, how are we doing through May? We're doing very well. All 4 years showed a deficit in May, so that's just 1 month in the mix, and you can see there's any 1 month might be up or down, and so it'll be interesting to see where our June comes in. This one I think is worth talking about, and you can see 2022, the green line has been consistently better than the last 3 years all year long. And so as we go into one of our most important months, June, we're positioned well that we should put some money back into the general fund. And so the last couple of years, the last 3 years, you can see there was really strong June collections, and so that helped. At the end of the year, we hope to have something similar. We want a strong June collection. So our expectations are high, and we hope to report some good news. Beach fee, May, we again, a very similar story. more than the last 2 years. May is not a big collection month, but we continue the same trend. Green is 2022, higher than the last couple of years, and so it's an important revenue, and it continues to do well. Hospitality, similar. May is better than the last couple of years, and we continue to do better than the last 2 years for hospitality. Stormwater, we have almost all of the stormwater revenue collected, and yet we've got June will be a more spending. But compared to last year, for the full year, stormwater had a gain, a net change in position to the good of $159,000. 11 months in, we're at $650,000 to the good, but we still have June expenses to go, so. This kind of speaks to Mr. Harkin's question from last month, and we'll get more into this, and we'll talk more about stormwater in the future, but if you look at our stormwater fixed assets from June 30th, 2021, our cost of what's on the books is $26 million. Accumulated depreciation is $12.7 million. Our net book value is $13.3. And so many of these stormwater improvements are depreciated over 25 years. And so basically we're 12 years in, 13 years to go. And so I put another little note on here too. Our depreciation is a little bit over $1 million a year, and we tried to tie that to our principal payments. And so from a cash flow basis, we kind of trade depreciation for principal, and it kind of helps with the cash planning.
John, does the depreciation, the bookkeeping depreciation, track fairly well with the reality of the system, of the wear and tear of the system?
I think we need our stormwater people to talk about that, but they do spend, there's a certain amount that we capitalize each year, and this is new and different, and then there's most of the activity is related to maintenance, and so that's about keeping the system in good operating order. And so I think that's what we want our stormwater people to talk about, and talk about how they measure that, how they determine the priorities of the projects. I think that would be a really healthy discussion. Revenue diversity, we also had a question last month. Councilman Stanford, what are we going to do if we have a recession? And so we need to think that way. Really hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And so what do we do with the recession? We've got these different revenue items, and there are different economic drivers, and so that helps give us some cushion. It gives us some diversity in our revenue collections, and that helps if any one revenue item might be bad or a bad collection year, we've got other options to go to. So this helps to offset revenue. Another thing I wanted to talk about is how do you manage through a recession? If you just look at this pie chart of our budget, our debt service is fixed, we have to pay it. Our general fund, our basic town operations, town council does have, and town management has the option, if they needed to, if a recession were to come, to kind of pace our capital projects. And that might be one of our first moves, is that we would certainly tighten up our operating costs, whatever we could, but we could also help to offset any kind of recessionary from the revenue side with pacing our capital projects. And so this, I think, is something that should give town council comfort.
And we did that. The last recession that we had was second quarter of 2020. And that's when you went to the capital projects and put a pause in place. And that's really one of the reasons this 45 million is up there. We're trying to catch up with what we paused in 2020.
Yeah, we still think these investments are good for the island. We want to be the leader, and invest in the island and hope that private investors will follow.
Yeah.
And so we want to be full speed ahead, but if we had to, we could pace these.
It's good that you showed us the diversity of the revenue sources. I think it would be very interesting to see what happened in a previous recession on those various categories, how much they were impacted, so that we could plan for the potentials of an impact of a new recession
I think that would be a really interesting look, yes.
for future meetings. Thank you.
So our key issues stay the same. These haven't really changed. Keep town council informed and facilitate timely responses so that we make sure that we're as responsive as we can be and need to be. Council can look forward to, or we're not that far away from having a full year of 2022. And we've already got 2023 on the books, and people are going and doing and executing the budget that town council has adopted. And so do we have any
Thank you,
comments or
John.
questions?
Committee, what are your comments or questions?
John, given the possibility of a recession or a slight turn down, are the rating agencies calling you and asking how things are going more than usual?
No, and that's been interesting because at the very start of the COVID, we were the first jurisdiction that Moody's called and wanted to know how we were going to manage through the COVID and what the impact of COVID would have on a economic or an economy that is based on tourism, and that they were concerned. And so with the last meeting that we had, it's been a couple of months, with the Moody's agency, they were 100% satisfied and took away the credit watch, and they sang our praises. And so we haven't had further communication with them. They're going to be, and we always have, once we get our annual report, then they always delve into those, and we always have discussions with the rating agencies about those. And then we don't have any debt issuances planned, and that's normally where we have another conversation with the rating agencies, and so we don't have that on the books because we're just paying debts and not issuing debt, at least now.
Thank you.
Yeah, John, thanks for going through these slides and fairly quickly. Still trying to get my head wrapped around some of it, so I'm going to ask you a very direct question. With June being so important to us on the revenue side, and also as we went through the expenditure side, a lot of the expenses, it seems as if we're either 80 to 90% there, right? But got 20% or 10% to go, and it being such a big number, I'm just curious to know where you think we're going to land at the end of the day, our expenses versus the revenue. Are we going to be ahead or slightly behind?
We're going to be ahead.
Okay.
We're going to be ahead. We're going to add money to the general fund balance this year.
Okay.
And so I think it's just a matter of, what is that amount? And, town council this year voted to increase the reserve policy. And so I think adding to the fund balance this year, it works very well with that new policy. And we'll talk about the amounts here very soon.
Sure. Thank you.
John, I'm very pleased with the positive variances, and we're counting on you to keep those up. Thank you.
John, are there any unfavorable trends through 11 months?
No, I think what we're seeing is, and to speak to Councilman Brown's question, is that we're a more complete utilization of the budget. And so there's what is turned back, or we call turn back, a budget not expended, is going down with tighter budgets. But what we're going to see is revenues above expectations. And so we are happy to report that.
And through 11 months, have there been, or is there any unfavorable variances?
we've got little pockets, but I would say no. I
Okay.
think we should be satisfied that we are operating as we should.
Okay, thank you. I'll take any public comments.
Yes. First of all, none of you are forensic CPAs. And I also want to know the overcharged legal fees. I want those broken out and not commingled. The adoption of the Town of Hilton Head budget should not have been approved, nor should have the fraudulent town audit been approved by Green Finney Firm until our corrupted town officials undergo a forensic audit. They have all been caught at illegal criminal acts, already including fraud, ethics violations, illegal criminal use of tax funds that include corrupted town manager Mark Orlando, insider from Bluffton, lawyer Josh Gruber, insider from Buford, and lawyer Curtis Coltrane, insider lawyer who drafted a fraudulent contract with lawyer Terry Finger to fund millions to the Hilton Head Bluffton Chamber with no accounting required. Yes, we all got the middle finger. CPA John Troyer, once forensically audited, will reveal crimes such as embezzlement, payoffs, laundering, facilitating illegal funding with other insiders. Steve Riley, the past 30-year town manager, and Mark Orlando, once this forensic audit is complete, I predict will be prosecuted and probably arrested based on the private investigations and information already provided by SouthCarolinaWatchdog.com. Please note an interesting fact. Never in the 300-year history of South Carolina or the entire U.S., when a forensic audit was forced, escaped wrongdoing and waste being discovered, and much of the time prison the result. I'm calling for a forensic audit in all of Beaufort County, since so much illegal criminal tax use has already been caught, and the overwhelming majority of elected officials are factually dishonest, crooked, and corrupted. I'm calling for forensic audits on all those who receive and control millions of tax funds issued by the South Carolina Treasury to clean the slate, identify crimes. In the future, make it mandatory every Beaufort County and South Carolina institution undergo forensic audits every 3 years, including the school district. It's a known fact, hired cookie-cutter financial audits only show the numbers insiders want us to see by design to hide crimes. Only a forensic audit identifies crimes and waste. Folks, tens of millions of hard-earned tax dollars money have, for the last 40 years in Beaufort County, has disappeared with zero oversight, transparency, and accountability or real audits. It's time to clean up, not the beautiful swamp where nice creatures live, but the cesspool of incestuous, baton-passing, backslapping, backroom dealing, lying, stealing, incompetent corruption we have all been dealing with and living with in Beaufort County for 50 years. Again, banker Tom H. Lennox, I hold in my hand evidence that you conspired and knowingly schemed another $600,000 tax theft to others to use with others to publicly fund the dredge the private Harbortown Yacht Basin. You need to be removed from council and investigated. And by the way, a lawyer from Greenville will be in contact with Curtis Coltrane, and you're going to be sued.
Any other public comments? Is there any other business to come before this committee?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. We stand adjourned.